Good morning, everyone. My name is Nigel Stevens, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the Chair of Transport Focus. And I'm delighted to welcome you today to the first of our thought leadership seminars, and today's one on rail reform and the passenger experience. So first of all, just a little bit about Transport Focus. We're there to represent the transport user, to make sure that across road, rail and bus, in different dimensions across parts of England and parts of the UK, we are the representative for those who travel around the UK. Today our focus is on rail, and we are really delighted to have a great cast of people who can focus on some of the things that are important as we drive into rail reform. I'm just going to offer 4 key points or questions to challenge everybody. Today we need to push the boundaries. What does rail travel look like from the passenger perspective, not from the rail user, not from the rail operator's perspective? How do we make it absolutely brilliant for the passenger? And what does really great feel like and look like to the passenger? I'm going to hand over to Thomas, because he's got a camera that works, and I will leave you to carry on, Thomas. I will come back at the end.
Thank you very much indeed. Welcome, everyone. We're going to be taking a pre-mortem approach to this session. So I'd like you to imagine it's 10 years in the future, and the headlines are all about just how uncustomer focused GBR is. What's caused that? How did we get there? Because if we can imagine that future, the future that none of us want, then we can think about what we need to be doing now to make sure that those terrible fears don't come true. Today is effectively about having the difficult conversations now so that we don't have to have them in future. And I'm really pleased with the group of people who've been kind enough to give us their lunchtime to help us understand what we need to be doing. Many of them have real life experience of publicly owned, vertically integrated railways that have managed to be customer focused. So they can really help us understand what could go wrong and what we need to be doing to make sure it goes right. So we have Vernon Everett, who is currently Commissioner of Transport for Greater Manchester, though in many ways I'm actually most interested to hear from his experience at TfL, because this isn't the first time that a whole bunch of disparate organisations have all come together in the public sector in a new organisation with a focus on serving the customer. And Vernon was right at the heart of how to make sure that TfL became the customer-focused organisation it did become, because another future was possible. GBR is also not the only public sector, publicly owned, publicly accountable railway. There is another one already live in Wales. Marie Daly is Chief Operating Officer and can help us understand what they have already learned and make sure that GBR learns from its success and avoids any early mistakes. It wouldn't be me if I wasn't insisting that we learn from the Swiss. Nick Haller is head of customer centricity at SBB, Swiss State Railways. They've been doing a customer-focused, publicly owned, publicly accountable, vertically integrated railway for many decades. What can we learn? Natasha Grice is Director of Rail at Transport Focus, obviously has a core priority of making sure that this all comes right as opposed to goes wrong. Jacqueline Starr, I've worked with on and off for many years. She has been Chief Executive of the Rail Delivery Group for over a decade, with an absolute, constant, unwavering focus of making sure that the customer is at the heart of everything that the rail industry does, through thick and thin and through endless different industry change. But let's start, before we come to this fantastic panel of rail experts, let's start by getting an external opinion. So yesterday, I spoke with Linda Moir, who used to run customer experience at Virgin Atlantic and then for London 2012. What does she think the dangers are, and how does she think we can avoid them?
This webinar on customer experience in the rail sector, and you are the ultimate expert because you ran customer experience for both Virgin Atlantic and the London 2012 Olympics. And I can confirm I used Virgin Atlantic during the time that you ran customer experience there. I visited various Olympic venues and the customer service was always excellent. In this webinar, we're doing a bit of a pre-mortem and imagining that it doesn't work out so well for GBR. But first of all, just tell me, why did it go so well at Virgin and London 2012? What was the secret?
Well, I wish I could tell you there was one simple secret that that if everybody just adopted, everything would be fine. But it actually, of course, was a little bit more complicated than that. And there were a number of things that we put in place. But I suppose the main thing that really was similar about both those experiences is that we had a really clear sense of purpose in both cases. So in the case of Virgin Atlantic, we were very clear that we weren't competing on price. We were competing based on customer experience and based on developing a passion for the brand, so that, in all honesty, we could charge a premium for our services. And in the case of the Olympic and Paralympic Games in London in 2012, we knew that we didn't have the what felt like unlimited budgets of, say, the Beijing Games or the kind of cultural disciplines of the Chinese Games. So we had to find a way of making our games memorable that drew on the strengths that we had. So I suppose if there's one overriding factor, it's having a super clear sense of what it is you're trying to achieve.
And do you think it matters? I mean, should people give up on this webinar now? We're not a premium airline trying to charge a fortune over against BA, and we're not trying to carve a place on the world stage. Does it matter for Great British Railways whether we focus on customers or not?
I think it matters. I think it matters phenomenally. As a regular customer, I think it matters enormously. I think it's part of brand GB, is how successful this is. It's part of developing pride, both in not just the rail industry, but in the whole of the kind of infrastructure of Great Britain, is to have this go super well. So I think all eyes are very much on this, and people have very high expectations. So yes, I think it matters. It matters for local communities. It matters for visitors. It matters in so many ways.
It's interesting you say about high expectations, because I think that's right. The government's put a lot of weight on the creation of a publicly owned railway and the difference that will make. And so the public absolutely are expecting it to get better. I was sitting on a delayed train last week, and I could hear people around me discussing the fact that when it's in public ownership, it will be so much better, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
So let's roll forward and imagine now 2036, not 2026. And let's imagine that it isn't, and that I'm on a delayed train and I'm hearing people around me say, this is terrible, the customer service is so awful, they don't care about me, they don't look after me. And there's just a consensus that GBR is a customer experience disaster. With your experience of knowing what it looks like when it goes well, what would it be like if it doesn't go well? Describe what that organisation could look like. Give me a bit of a pen portrait and a character portrait of that organisation.
For the organisation that doesn't go well.
Yeah, for the GBR that doesn't work out from a customer perspective.
Well. Yeah, no, it's a very good exercise, and I think it's really worth sort of pondering on, because one of the watch-outs, I guess, is that it becomes a highly operationally focused organisation rather than a customer-centric organisation. And that's incredibly tempting. I mean, when I first joined British Airways, golly, back in the Tudor period, I think we looked at ourselves and thought that we were proudly an operationally driven organisation. And then we had a new CEO who came in and said, instead of running we used to call it the train set, instead of running the airline in order to be operationally, obviously we had to be operationally safe and sound and all those good things, but we were making it convenient for us, for the operation. We were not making it convenient or helpful for the customer. So the risk, and I think this really is a risk in rail, that focus on the operation can take over from focus on the customer. So an example of that, I've seen is when everybody's running around trying to fix the problem, nobody's telling the customer what's going on. So that's an example of an organization that is very operationally focused. And of course, the operational issue needs to be sorted, but the customer needs to know, how long am I going to be stuck here for? So being customer focused, looking forward, and what could a less customer-centric organization look like? It could be look like one that's very operationally focused. It could look like one where people shrug their shoulders both inside the organization and customers and say nothing's changed. Absolutely nothing's changed. You know, for me, I love to sort of do a barometer check of what the staff are saying, because that gives you a real sense of, is the organisation successful or not. So when you see staff gathered round the equivalent of the water cooler and moaning publicly, that's when you know you've really lost the team on the inside. So I think a negative experience would be where there are poor employee engagement scores. I think also, I think another factor could be where there's very much a kind of command and control leadership style. So there isn't the opportunity for collaboration. There isn't a kind of opportunity for people to get involved in decision making. So I know that sounds, some people might be listening to thinking this and thinking, well, that sounds soft. I think actually that's how you create a genuinely authentic customer experience, is by giving people the opportunity to be involved. So I suppose those are the first three things that spring to mind.
That's fascinating. A number of thoughts on that. The first is just the temptation to be operationally led. I remember when I did my graduate training at Euston Station as a duty station manager, one of my seminal moments was the fact that, because I'm passionate about customer service, customer experience, was I as the duty manager, I did exactly that. I was totally focused on solving the problem, and then someone bashed on my window and said, "What's actually going on?" And I realised I'd committed that cardinal sin completely unintentionally, because
Yes,
it's so easy to do, and
it's
at an
so easy, and
institutional
it's
level,
very
it's so
seductive.
easy.
Yeah, it's very seductive. I mean, certainly in my experience of aviation, if there were ever any, you know, a big issue, I mean, goodness knows, say there was a strike, everybody would ditch the day job, go and buy a high-vis jacket and a bacon sandwich, and it was huge, you know, it was almost, dare I say it, fun. But actually, that's not really how to create a really memorable customer experience, is to, yeah, think about the customer first, not the operation.
One of the things I thought was really interesting what you said there is most of the things you described were actually focusing on the inside, because you'd expect someone talking about the things that could go wrong from the point of view of developing a customer-centric organization to be talking about, I don't know, surveys or touch points or pulse points, but you actually were talking about employee engagement, command and control culture, how the organization's led. So in many ways, a lot of your advice to the organization to avoid those bad things happening would be to really focus on how the organization is led and how it thinks about itself, as much as thinking, oh, to be customer, we need to always be thinking customer.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for spotting that, because that's exactly what I believe in. You know, there's not, I don't refer to many kind of academic models, but there is something called the surface profit chain that I discovered early in my career, developed by Harvard Business School. But it basically draws the connection between great leadership and what I talk about. When I talk about leadership, I think of it as being a verb rather than a noun. So it's something that everyone can do. Creating a culture of great leadership that has an impact on the employee experience, which has a direct impact on the customer experience. You can't be something on the outside that you don't replicate on the inside. It just doesn't work. So yeah, I think unusually, I believe the way into a great customer experience is to start with the employee experience.
Now, you made specific reference to being operationally led and to being command and control. And you have also worked in a highly operational, timetable driven, engineering led
Yes.
safety critical environment at Virgin. And these environments are often operationally led and by necessity have huge elements of command and control. So describe for us, if we're going to not have that bad outcome, what does that look like in a world which is operationally focused
Yes.
and has elements of command and control by necessity?
Absolutely. And it is, yes, exactly. There is a necessity. And in a safety critical, highly regulated environment, then of course it's important that everybody understands what their role is when it comes to safety, security, evacuation procedures, medical issues. All these things are absolutely fundamental. And I think it's okay to be unapologetic about making sure that everybody understands their role in those things. So, and there's also a place for humanity, good communications behavior, creating a relationship with the customer. My examples of Virgin with this is, of course, there are evacuation procedures that are law that we have to go through on every single flight. So you just have to do it. There's no discussion about that. Once that's done, then there's an opportunity to build great relationships with customers, finding ways of just starting a conversation. And not every conversation has to be based on a transaction. Customers, when they travel, are bored, and anyone who pops along and has a chat is generally hugely welcome. And if you've got people on board who've actually got the instinct to know who wants to chat and who wants to be left alone, then you've really cracked it.
So I can imagine someone listening to this who they won't know it yet, but they might have a leadership position in GBR in the future, thinking all customers really want is for the train to run on time. And certainly, if we don't make the train run on time, nothing else that we do matters. And therefore, of course, we must be operationally led because our success is driven by our operation and our customer perception is driven by our operation. I expect that there are elements of truth there, and I expect there are elements of truth in that statement as applied to Virgin as well. So help us understand how we can be operationally led and yet not operationally led.
Well, I think the trick is to be operationally led when it benefits the customer. So to achieve operational excellence, the best way of achieving operational excellence might be to not operate at weekends, because that way the engineers can get their hands all over the kit and make sure they're perfect for Monday to Friday running. That is not being customer focused. It's being purely operationally focused. So of course, the customer can be demanding and have both. The customer wants clean, on time transport. We used to call that brilliant basics at Virgin. That means in the world that I came from, which was the cabin world, that meant making sure that things like the toilets were clean. Now, I've met thousands of cabin crew in my life. Nobody started flying because they wanted to clean toilets. I can absolutely assure you of that. So we had a lot of work to do to make sure that our crew understood just how important that was. And it was non-negotiable. That had to be done. Beyond that, there was the opportunity. I mean, we called it magic touches. So the opportunity for crew to use their personalities and to create moments of magic for our customers. Can I give you an example of
Please
one?
do.
So, I don't sound like I'm talking about sort of fairyland stuff. So the best letter I ever got when I was working at Virgin from a customer was from a business customer. But he wasn't writing about a business trip. He was writing about taking taking 3 young children. They're off to Disney in Orlando for a week. Yikes. They get on board the airplane, turn right, sitting at the back of the economy cabin. Everybody's happy until the food arrives and it's chicken curry or vegetable lasagna. And the children say, I'm not eating that and I'm hungry. So poor man is now a little bit stressed and he presses the call bell. Virgin crew member arrives and he explains what's happened. Had she worked in a kind of an autocratic command and control, purely rule-bound culture, she might have said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you should have gone online yesterday and filled out 100 forms and told us everything about your children, and we could have loaded kids' food." But she didn't do that. She went to the galley and she found 3 clean sick bags, wrote the children's names on each one, and went to the cart of food that had been loaded for the crew and found sandwiches, fruit, sweets, made up 3 little picnic bags. Now, I love that story because people don't do that because they've been on a course or they've been told to do it in a training manual, or that an instruction has been issued. In fact, I would say that would push people in entirely a different direction. She did that because she loved her job. So for me, that demonstrates the importance of getting that employee engagement. You know, opportunities like that would be totally missed unless somebody just purely and simply loved what they were doing.
People have also got to have permission to act. And I think there's something really interesting in your 2012 experience there as well, because we all, those of us who were lucky enough to visit the various sites, had the experience of the games makers doing all kinds of crazy nonsense that clearly wasn't scripted.
Absolutely.
And leadership has to be willing to take risks and to allow people to act, because any one of those people could have blown up the reputation of London 2012. And yet you, as their leaders, allowed them to do that. Did you make that decision consciously? And if so, how did you get comfortable with the risks?
Yeah, no, great question. Really good question, because that's exactly the nub of it. Again, at 2012, for our Games Maker volunteers, we had to be super clear about what some of the tasks were that had to be done. They were part of the whole safety team. So there were certain things that had to be done, again, non-negotiables. And sometimes when people hear me talk about the importance of employee engagement, they find the notion of non-negotiables sort of, you know, sits a little uncomfortably. I think it's perfectly possible to do both. So we were very clear about what had to be done. And to be honest, a lot of the tasks that our games makers were performing were quite repetitive, not necessarily the most kind of high level tasks, but they took those and they made them their own. So we really encouraged personality. So, for example, tickets had to be scanned, but then you could have a bit of fun with the children, or you could have a bit of fun with the queue. And people did, as you said, extraordinary things that didn't cost anything. You know, what I've learned working in customer experience is it's very easy. Anyone with deep pockets, any competitor with deep pockets can copy your product. Much more difficult to copy your service.
Final question, coming back to your pre-mortem of what could go wrong for GBR.
Yes.
One of the things you said is a sense that nothing's changed. So at some point in the not too distant future, GBR will actually exist, will actually be a name that customers start to hear. Do you feel like it's important to have a kind of quick wins program for customers lined up, ready to go when that moment happens?
I do, but it's got to be something that's authentic. Symbols of change are really important. So that the opportunities around those symbols of change could be trying to find a quick win. It could be around staff behavior. But I think before the new enterprise thinks about doing something for the customer, the priority has got to be for the people who are going to be wearing the uniform, running the organization. They have got to feel like this is going to be different.
Well, that's a really clear message from this conversation. So, Linda Moir, final request, pre-mortem, therefore, Tuesday, the 21st of April, that's when we're talking now, 2036, can I book you to come back and tell us how it's gone? Give us your honest perspective of the railway then.
Love that. That would be great.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Right. Well, I hope you found that as interesting as I did. The reason why we're running today's session as we are is that our starting premise is GBR might not be customer focused. It's not a given. A lot of the assumptions being built into this are that it will be because it's being run in the public sector for the public good. And hopefully that's sufficient. But there were a lot of safeguards built into the privatization era that are being replaced with that assumption that GBR will just get this right. When I was commercial director of a rail franchise, we had fares regulations. We had put in franchise bids in response to tenders that defined what good looked like. We had franchise commitments that tied us to obligations. There were passenger service requirements for timetables. My guess is a lot of those guardrails will vanish or change because we're not going to be assuming a contractual model for ensuring customer focus. But that means it could all go wrong, and it could be worse than now. So continuing the pre-mortem I started with Linda Moir, I'm going to come to my fantastic panel, and I'm going to imagine it's 2036, it's 10 years into the future. The headlines are about just how bad GBR is from a customer perspective. What caused that? How did we get there? So Vernon, GBR is a customer disaster. What happened?
Well, we failed to persuade more people to use us. The whole challenge, I love that session with Linda, incidentally. Just reminded us of so many of the eternal verities that we mustn't lose sight of. I think there is a very real risk that the operational side will still overpower it. I mean, that's got to, the customer side of things have got to be so deeply embedded in the organisation to counterbalance that. And that's going to take time. But I think if we find ourselves by that stage where ridership is going down and performance hasn't improved, we'll be in a world of the railways being cut, and we'll be in a downward spiral that we will find it very hard to get out of. I'm a bit more optimistic than that. I don't think we will get there, but that's the risk, that we fail to use what's happening around the country with devolved nations and devolved regions to hitch the rail tent to all of that, to generate growth, to generate more housing, because of course that's what it's all about. It's not just about making people feel nice on their journey. This has got to produce some other benefits, including economic growth, getting people to work and all the rest of it. But unless we're able to integrate the railway plan with everything else that's going on around the country, we stand a chance of missing the target, and actually it being very painful as we try and balance the devolution agenda with a central guiding mind for the railways. I mean, taken at face value, those things are pulling in opposite directions, and therefore we need to make sure that doesn't inflict the doomsday scenario.
Thank you. Marie, you are in a publicly owned, publicly accountable railway. I'm not going to ask you to imagine it's all gone wrong for Transport for Wales, because obviously that's not going to happen. But I am going to ask you to imagine it's all gone wrong from a customer perspective at GBR in 10 years' time. Describe to me what that organisation looks like. How did we get there? It's not a prediction, but an imagination.
Yeah, and I think we can draw on some of the lessons that we've learned. So I think we heard Linda say, which is spot on, that in the rail industry, the cultural currency is operational knowledge. So how do we change that cultural currency to customer? And I think that can't be a slogan by putting customer at the heart of what we do. It's got to be created by aligning structural, cultural change. So in 2021, we created an integrated customer-centric operating model, and that was underpinned by our purpose and a brand called T Network. And, you know, we aligned customer proposition and colleague proposition. I think that I could definitely relate to what Linda was saying there. You know, you cannot deliver a brilliant customer experience if your colleague experience does not drive that. So I think that's exactly where we are. We aligned our governance, mindset, insight for the customer, for customer outcomes. Otherwise, the system defaults back. So I think for me, the key message would be in 10 years' time, if that would be the case, is that we have not built in that to the system, and therefore the default mindset that exists today will still be there.
default operational mindset. Is that the biggest risk for 2036? Jack, tell me what that looks like in 2036 if GBR has not succeeded. Describe that world to me and how we got there. Mute.
All right, here we go. A few punchy thoughts from me. So first of all, we failed to take our people along with us on that journey, kind of just building on that employee engagement, customer satisfaction relationship that Linda described. The focus remained very much on the structures of GBR and not the customer outcomes. And we talked about customer impact after decisions were made and not before. The directing mind, as it was, failed to reduce bureaucracy. It instead created a perhaps judge and jury scenario where GBR controlled track infrastructure, passenger services, creating conflicts of interest and reduced independent scrutiny. GBR failed to operate as an independent entity, with transport ministers constantly reshaping strategy for political gain rather than long-term passenger benefit. And GBR's long-term strategy to include the customer strategy became susceptible to political whims, therefore, resulting in stop-start funding and fractured investment. And finally, GBR failed to listen and respond to customer insight and didn't have the system set up quickly to act on what customers had told them.
Fantastic. There's a brilliant checklist of things that absolutely all could go wrong. And later in the session, we'll come back. I'm going to tick those off one by one to make sure we've worked out what we need to do about them all. But first of all, Nick, looking in from overseas, Swiss State Railways is not a failing organisation when it comes to customers. And I find it hard to imagine that being the case in 10 years' time. But what could an organisation in the rail sector that is failing customers look like, and how could it come into existence? What's your perspective from Switzerland?
Yeah, so I tried to bring in a little bit a systemic view. I don't know exactly how this would be provided to public transport, but I think you will have many parties delivering that. And I think what could go really wrong is that there is no understanding of an end-to-end customer journey. So everything is brought in bits, and you have like no integrated schedules, no integrated ticketing. So imagine a customer, as I tried to make an example of, and I don't know if it's good for Great Britain, but people are not traveling from London to Manchester. They are traveling from home to grandma. So you also have the first mile and the last mile you have to take care of. And imagine if you go there, you have like handovers. You have to maybe download 3 or 4 apps, and in worst case, they have their own cryptocurrency, with which you have to pay, things like that. So that will be a nightmare to travel like that. So this is one thing that could really go wrong. Also, if you have different companies providing that, they are just focusing on efficiency, on cost cutting, and then the customer can really drop off the thing. I think something that you can also do wrong is, don't get me wrong here, that you do too much digital. We also try to do that in Switzerland, but this is a good thing per se, don't get me wrong. But we have also elderly people, and they sometimes can really not use apps. They don't know how to pay digitally. So we need people, and the managers who want to fire all the people often make everything with AI and digitally. It's not working really well. And one thing also, we heard it before, is don't make it complex. It sounds easy, but it's hard to do. Make it really as simple as you can in tariff system, in prices, in ticketing, in everything. You cannot be simple enough, because when you come as a tourist to another country and you're standing there in front of the vending machine and you see all these maps, it's really hard to navigate through this thing. And maybe the last thing is like collecting customer data, listening, but not really acting on it. So this is something that you have to do, not just the manager say we need more customer satisfaction next year hire. You also need budget for that. You need resources, people who can really work on this to make these customer pains go away. So much
Fantastic.
for that.
Thank you. That's absolutely superb. Natasha, your worst nightmare as Transport Focus, if in 10 years' time it is not a customer-centric organisation, describe what that could look like and how it could have happened.
Yeah, thank you. And it's been really interesting hearing the points so far. I guess from my perspective, from a Transport Focus hat on, it would be really sad if we ended up in this situation in 2036 and passengers have stopped telling us what they think about the railway because they haven't seen any change as a result of sharing what they feel about their experience and their interaction with the industry. And I think that would be a really sad state of affairs if we've got to that point where they are just sick and tired of telling us and not seeing any tangible change as a result.
Fantastic, thank you. So to summarize where we are so far, the things that could have happened in 2036, we could have failed to connect rail to the emerging devolution agenda, and those could be completely separate. The cultural currency, as Marie described it, could be unchanged. It could still all be about the operation and not about customers. We could have failed to invest in and focus on our people. We could be putting structures before customers. GBR could be the sole judge and jury, and even worse, that judge and jury is making decisions for politicians and political gain as opposed to customers. We could have failed to listen to customers, and then, as Natasha says, passengers stop even talking to us and telling us what they think. And Nick's point, we could have lost a focus or not built a focus on the end-to-end customer journey, the home to grandma. We could have too much focus on cost cutting as opposed to customers, too much focus on digital. We could have made it too complex, and we could have failed to put in place budgets to actually support customer change. So a lot to deal with there. Vernon, do you want to give us some ideas as to how to prevent either any one of those or all of those? And I'm especially interested in your perspective from TfL, given that you have probably the most analogous experience of not only anyone on this panel, but probably anyone in the industry.
Well, I think Linda hit the nail on the head, and it flows from purpose and making sure that from the politicians to the boardroom, flowing down to the platform, everybody stays true to the purpose. And you asked me, Thomas, about TfL. In 2007, when I joined, TfL was trying to do the right thing, and there were lots of people with customer in their title and all the rest of it, but none of them spoke to each other. And we had a very siloed organisation. Buses didn't talk to tubes, didn't talk to trams, so on. And we had a really weird meeting in Centre Court where I got everyone together to say, what are we all driving at? What are we trying to do here? And remember, at the time, and even now, TfL's job, the burning deck was to get more people to use public transport and active travel to make the city's growth sustainable. So there was a real life need for this. And it was a really weird meeting. We alighted on the fact that the big thing that we were missing was a common sense of purpose against which you could then attach measures. So TfL never had care, for example, on its corporate scorecard. It always had time the trains turned up. Now time the buses turned up. That's not a bad thing, but it doesn't tell you what you need to know about attracting more people to use you. So we used that moment of realization to start working through what we knew about TfL. There was loads and loads of data in the house, loads of customer insight and all the rest of it. No one had ever drawn insight from it. It was just a whole bunch of surveys and things like that that sort of told you everything about what had happened that month. But no one had stared at it to say, well, what do we do then to act upon all of this to make things better? So we started to do that, and we came up with a grid of customer pain and gain points, which were all around the things we know: simplicity of fares, giving people the information when they need it, and all of that. And for the first time in TfL's history, we were able to put a costed customer strategy and plan around dealing with those things. And it made it a thing. It didn't make it a thing that was on the edge of the desk of the head of the London Underground. It made it a thing that was at the centre of TfL's corporate governance. And strangely enough, going back to Linda's comments, the advent of the Olympics was really fortuitous because we had to bring all of those things together in a different way, at the time of the Olympic Games, because the stadiums were built, the athletes were ready. The only people that could screw it up were Transport for London. So we brought everything that we had learned during the preceding 3 or 4 years and brought it to bear. And we were able to demonstrate that we could get revenue up and cost down, and customer satisfaction up at the same time. So there was no greater simplicity than no greater magic to it than that, but it required resilience and constant going at it, because it is so easy for these big organizations, big engineering organizations, to revert to type. I must say though, we do need to realize that we need to keep everything safe, and I think regulation has heaped far too much into the safety bucket, and it's made the cost of the industry enormous and all the rest of it. But as we move to unpick that, we must do that very judiciously, because if we lose a reputation for safety, and I mean that about our assets as well as the safety of our users, if we lose control over that, then we really will be in trouble. So there is a need to drive the customer side of things. There is also a need not to lose sight of safe, reliable services as being at the heart of things as well.
Let me just pull out something you said quite quickly there, which I think is really important, your point about care on the customer scorecard. And this outlasted your time at TfL because we only briefly overlapped. But this is so important. One of the key metrics that everyone in TfL is judged on is on a metric of whether Londoners think that TfL cares about them. And one of the things I love about that metric is that it is so dispersed. It's about what people hear in the pub about people telling them what they experienced the day before. And I'm sure this happened in your day, Vernon, even in my day when it had been around a long time, I had lots of grumbles from operators saying, well, how do I influence that? Anyone could just think what they like. How am I meant to influence that? But that's the entire point. It's not just about a knee-jerk lever you pull. It's about the fundamental culture of what the organisation offers to all Londoners. The fact that was on the scorecard, I found immensely powerful. Jack, you had a long list of things that could have gone wrong in 2036, and every single one of them felt dangerously realistic. What do we do to prevent them? What does the opposite look like?
Sorry, I've got a laptop which is being very slow. I think Vernon touched on this actually, and one of the things for me is customer strategy, and it's really key. And I know it can be an overused word, but as we stand right now, there isn't a single reference point that allows us internally, those within key roles, our employees, or indeed our customers, and I'll come on to that, to understand what our target state is, where we want to get to, where we want to arrive at in terms of the outcomes and the changes and the benefits that we want to deliver for our customer. And if you think about that whole piece, so not only is there value in the collaborative development and ultimate production of that as a reference point to give you clarity and purpose, there is strong benefit in taking people on that journey with you and creating a very honest relationship with the public, the users of the railway, our customer, being really transparent around things that don't work out so well, being clear around things that perhaps need to change. We know things change, we know the environment changes, we know the economy changes, we know people changes, needs change. So it's not going to be a static strategy, but we take people on that journey with us, and you create a brand that is trusted and respected. And like many other brands that we see, across the globe, people can look up to that brand and they know exactly what they're going to get. And when we fall short of it, we've got measures and we've got a system in place to listen to the customer that we can build off the back of the RCXS capability that has been developed. And we use that system religiously to understand what the customer thinks of us, we consume that information, and we iterate the strategy off the back of it. It sounds quite simple, really.
Marie, is it that simple? You've started on this journey. What do we need to do to prevent all of the horrific list of terrible outcomes that could so plausibly occur actually occurring from the perspective of someone already running a publicly owned, publicly accountable railway?
Yeah, pulling on a couple of threads from Vernon and Jack, really. So I think it absolutely needs to be systematic. So I think willing it to happen is a great thing, but you need a plan, because actually if your organisation's worked in a certain way for a period of time, but I think the key thing for me about that plan and having that strategy is remember it needs to be flexible, because people experience rail locally, not nationally. So I think it's having a plan that is flexible but being able to deploy that locally as well. And one of the things we've been really systematic about is, going to Nick's point really before, is about our customer journeys, and within those our customer propositions, and being really documented with our colleague voice, with insights from the customer, with stakeholders and communities, around being honest about what we can deliver within that customer journey and that proposition, but also holding ourselves to account around when we're not delivering that, and using that insight. And that enables our colleagues to be then human and be able to say, we know we're not getting this right, but we're working on this. We know we haven't got this right today, because this is what we needed to do. So I think it is all about being really clear on what your customer journey map looks like, having a system internally that's supported by colleagues to deliver that, and holding yourself to account. And I think being honest with people is definitely sits at the heart of our purpose in TFW.
Thank you. Nick, you also had quite a long list of things that could go wrong, all of which seemed extremely plausible, from an organisation that is ahead of us by several decades, about a century, in being a publicly owned, publicly accountable railway that's getting a lot of this right. What's your advice for what we need to be doing to make sure that we end up more like SBB is, and not the danger you described?
Yeah, I would say you need a really good ownership of this end-to-end customer journey, someone who really understands that, maybe even politically carried somehow and driven. And that means really then seamless traveling. Like I said, you need integrated ticketing, tariffs, prices, schedules. You need good connections that people don't have to wait too much if they want to get from one train to the other, or even on the bus. You need good handling when things are delayed, because that will happen. And also very key, a good customer information system. Something we heard before from Linda, I guess, and it's really basic, but absolutely key. And we have absolutely the same in Switzerland. If you ask customers what we have to deliver or provide first in transportation, they say the same: punctuality, cleanness, toilets, a big topic. It might make people laugh, but it's a big topic. And also really good customer information. And if you do these basic rights, then you can start to maybe make some fancy innovation. But before you are not doing this, forget about the fancy innovation. You have to do the basics first, and then you have a good customer experience with which you then can build on, and then measure these things and act on the customer pains.
Natasha, does this start to sound like the kind of rail industry that, from a transport focus point of view, you want to be supervising?
I mean, absolutely. And just from personal experience of working in an operator, I can really relate to the comments that have been shared around creating that culture, so it's not solely focusing on the operation. I can remember a time at Virgin Trains when we did solely focus on the operation and running trains on time and staying safe. Absolutely, that's important. But toilets weren't working, and the coffee machines were broken, and staff were feeling completely disempowered to be able to do the right thing for customers. So we would need to take a sharp look at ourselves and change that to make sure that our frontline teams felt completely empowered to do the right things for customers, exactly as Nick's just described, dealing with the brilliant basics to make that, an appealing place to come to work, but more importantly, an appealing place for customers to want to travel. So I really hope that, as we do get into the future and we start to focus on the strategy, that strategy is developed with the people that are responsible for delivering it day in, day out. Because if you look after the employees, they're going to look after the customers. So yes, that is definitely something that I think from a transport focus perspective that we absolutely want to see. We want to see the right things being delivered for passengers.
One question I'd like to open to the floor, so anyone answer this, but one of the things I noticed from our outsiders, from Linda and from Nick, are a priority for delivering basics, but some of them aren't the things we necessarily think of as basics ourselves. So we've heard a lot about toilets, and yet I'm sure we all have the experience. I had the experience two weeks ago of being on a railway station with my elderly mother, and the toilets on this platform were all locked, even though there was staff on the station. Who knows why, but she wasn't able to use them and she wasn't very pleased. Is that a basic? Because we don't maybe define it as such. Nick talked about digital and the importance of not relying too much on digital. Nick talked a lot about integration of end-to-end customer journeys, of home to grandma, connections with buses, simplicity. Some of these are things that feel to me like if you asked a lot of people in the rail industries to list what the basics are, they wouldn't all get listed. So we might end up saying we're going to really focus on customer basics and yet miss them. I'm just going to pause for a second to reprise some of the key things, a lot about purpose and the need for a defined purpose, to tie that into a defined customer strategy that builds an honest relationship with customers, the importance of understanding the entire customer journey and defining it and it being systematic. You can't just will this to happen, that ownership of the end-to-end customer journey with integration, and the importance of the basics being right, but the basics not just being the basics as we might define them, but including the toilets, including the coffee machine, including the bus journey. Two thoughts again for anyone on the panel to answer. The first is that right? If we do those things, does that solve our long list of things that could go wrong earlier? And secondly, how do we make sure we do those things? Because they sound simple, but it's in an operationally led organization where everyone's always focused on this morning's peak. How do we make sure that actually happens? So are those the right things? Are they sufficient? And how do we make sure they happen? Anyone on the panel like to comment on that? Jack.
Thanks, Thomas. This might not be a direct answer. I'm not intending to avoid it, but one of the things that I can't quite crack is, we've got a panel today that are clearly focused on the customer, and in our conversations across industry and beyond on a regular basis, we will come across people who are absolutely passionate about the customer. They want to do the right thing. I'm not entirely clear why we aren't getting that level of penetration, adoption and action in the industry and into GBR. It is still very piecemeal, sometimes by chance. And so I think in addition to what you've set out in terms of some of those kind of golden measures, there's a behavioural piece, there's a cultural piece, and perhaps, and I'm going to put this thought out there, perhaps some of the people in the industry actually didn't come into an industry that is now very much a service industry. And so do we have the right fit in terms of those behaviours?
Thank you. Marie, any thoughts on that and on my original question?
Well, I think it builds in a little bit of both. I think it's about looking for the opportunities within that system will have the biggest bang for the buck and the opportunities for GBR. And if I take a lesson learned we've had in Wales, it's having an integrated control centre, which is the nerve centre making the decisions and the choices and the trade-offs for customers every day without organisational constraints. So I think it is about truly understanding in that system where you've got that biggest bang for impact for the customer and being relentless in challenging first principles around decisions that are made for train operations, actually overlay that with customer. And going back to Bernard's point, it's always going to be about safety, and the constraint of safety should be something we feel really comfortable with. But actually at that point of decision making around what you're doing day to day, where was the balance of customer and operation, and how do, as Jack said, do we recruit now the right attributes for people in those roles versus particularly what were attributes probably required when it was an operational currency. So that would be my view.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Right. Oh, Natasha.
Sorry, Thomas.
Please carry on.
And I was just going to add to that and just say that, we've spoke a lot about leadership and culture, and the thing that we really mustn't lose sight on is, there's over 100,000 people currently in the industry. And if we don't make people feel empowered and trusted to be able to get on and do the right thing for passengers, there is a risk that we will hemorrhage talent. and worse still, attract future talent into the industry before we set up GBR. So I think there's something about trusting the leadership of the organisations to be able to do the right thing for customers and not have to go through too many loops of bureaucracy to be able to make decisions.
Thank you. Right, I'm now up, Nick.
I'm sorry, I would like
Please
to
go.
add.
Please do.
If you want to have this somehow running, please make the decision makers and the politicians and the top managers also use their own product. I'm overdoing it a little bit. They shouldn't only go in the Bentley to the office, but make them go on the train, make them go talk to the customers, how they feel. You were talking about basics. They will tell you what is basic. And then you really also have like the power you need behind these topics.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to go to a few of the comments and questions that we've been getting as we've been talking. Probably the one that is always at the very heart of decision making in rail. How do you get HM Treasury to trust the industry to manage costs? Without that, it won't be given the flexibility to fund a better customer experience. How and linked to that, how do you make the case to Treasury DFT for funding the customer strategy, or do you need to if the government is truly separate from GBR? And linked to that, I think you have to lock up your commercial strategy and your customer strategy, revenue up, cost down, they're inextricably linked. So how do we pay for this? And given the connection between our world and the Treasury, how do we persuade the Treasury that we need to pay for this? Would anyone like to comment on that? Vernon?
Thomas, I just put thing in the chat there. I don't think these things are separate things at all. What we've got to do to make the rail service sustainable is to get more people to use us, to get the revenue up and the net cost and subsidy down. And an enormous element of the commercial strategy is therefore your customer strategy. I wish I'd thought about it before, actually, but one of the other core things that we did at TfL was actually get care on the scorecard, as you mentioned, and what gets measured gets done and all of that. So you need to describe this thing, you need to describe these things in the round and not as separate exercises. So that I think it's all in there, and you don't seek to price up a separate customer strategy. You might need a separate budget for your PR and all, your advertising and all of those things, because you need to tell people what a good service they are able to get and at what price and so on. But I think there's a false distinction made between the commercial strategy and the other thing, to persuade the Treasury, show it works. So I put an example in the chat that Manchester's rail fares have been simplified. There were 17 different types of fare from central Manchester to the airport, and now there's one, and you can get on any train and you don't have to wait for the train that's got the right logo on the side to get on it. And strangely enough, there's a net 6% increase in rail travel to and from central Manchester and the airport. Nothing else has happened. It's that thing that's happened. So we need to play those things back to win confidence that we're not on a fool's errand here.
Thank you. Marie?
I think I was going to come in because it answers one of the questions on safety as well. That seems to be flowing through the chat bar, is that I think it's basing your business case and your influence from the customers that we're not reaching. So I've talked about a lot of that customer segmentation, so we know we spoke about before is around the level boarding. 23% of Wales are registered as disabled. Bringing level boarding in as on our metro system, the business case is there because actually when you look at the revenue that we're losing by not tapping into that customer segmentation, then I think you can connect the two quite easily. And from some of the behaviour change analysis that we've done, the barriers to women using rail are around lighting, safety, and improving those. We did a gender equity audit of all of our stations and depots to look where that was, and that's going to enhance safety for everyone, but it's understanding where safety is a barrier and actually then how can we align funding. And we've been working with Welsh Government to look at a gender funding line and actually building that into infrastructure projects, but making the case around around revenue, because then we're going to see more women coming to using and that barrier being removed. So I think it's aligning that to actually your revenue and your growth and your business case based on that customer insight.
Thank you very much. One of the comments in the chat is, I think there's something about empowering people to feel able to act. And that's something that came out from Linda's interview very strongly, this sense that people both at London 2012 and at Virgin were empowered to act. And sometimes that's not really the culture of the rail sector. So how do we get that balance right between people feeling empowered when it's in the interest of the customer, but not when we don't want them to be empowered to drive trains differently? Vernon, how do we square that circle?
Well, I was going to say you asked Marie Daly, because Marie's team at Transport for Wales does this every day, and they fix problems. And I think there's a default function to for most people to try and fix problems actually when they arise. The thing I find most frustrating is when I'm on my Avanti waiting to leave Euston to go to Manchester or wherever. The first 20 minutes is taken up by the guard telling me the different types of tickets and the different things they'll do to me if I haven't got the right one. And that just feels just sort of adversarial, when actually you want a nice welcome and then someone to walk through the train, say good morning and ask if you've got any questions. So I don't know. I think people want to do the right thing, but the system often works against them and militates against them doing the right thing.
Thank you.
But Marie, I think Marie's got the answer. What is
Marie,
it, Marie?
you've got the answer. What's the answer to empowerment?
So the answer to empowerment is telling people to do the right thing. And that's one of our values. You will not be punished for doing the right thing. We have a very just culture, and actually we're human. I always go back to, and in that moment, what does that customer need? And where is an organisational constraint going to mean you can't do it? As Linda said, we don't want Stepford employees. We want people who are human, and we want you to do the right thing. And if you do, and there's a mistake, then we will support you. As I genuinely believe what is not my culture, TFW's culture.
Thank you. Been asked about disability. Now, you mentioned earlier, Nick, about the importance of considering the elderly, not focusing too much on digital. What about beyond elderly, wider disabled users? How does SBB think about disabled users in the context of a transport system?
This is actually also politically very much carried. So when we do something, we always have to take care about them. This is really, I don't know where this is written or put in, maybe in the 1300s or so. No joke. We really have to always think about disabled people, that they can find the train, that we have no barriers. And some projects even cannot be made because we cannot provide this. So this is really a huge topic, and also requires a lot of budget actually. But I think it's just fair if we give everyone the same chance to use a transport system.
Thank you. Any other comments, Jack?
Yeah, so we've been running a program called Travelling in Your Shoes, and it's intended to take senior leaders from the industry out onto the network with individuals who have a range of disabilities, because we've got lots of data, we've got lots of reports, we've got an accessibility program and roadmap. We've got a few products out there, but they do not tell you what you learn when you go out on the network with an individual who has disabilities, and just the reality of what they have to navigate, how they feel, what they would really welcome in terms of making life easier for them. So we'll continue to do that, and we've been kind of sharing that. Alex from Transport Focus has been out with us. It's a really strong and powerful way of just conveying that message and then feeding it back into change.
TfL runs a very similar program, which I did when I was there, and it is immensely powerful. Vernon?
I think you have to link this with the commercial strategy and your investment decisions. The thing that GBR is going to be able to do now is put revenue growth alongside the way in which assets are managed. And I think there is no alternative to fixing accessibility than throwing a truckload of money at it. Now, you will have to moderate the rate at which you do it, but I bet we will start to see that getting paid back through increased fare revenues. And also, I think we need to devolve access for all funding. at the moment, when you make a bid for Access for All funding, it goes into a central machine in London, and they're telling people in the regions which stations and in what order they should be made more accessible, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. So I think we will always be talking about this unless we put serious money behind it, and that needs to be raised locally as well as centrally, but has to be hitched to the commercial strategy of the organisation. I think we suppress so many journeys through just making it a nightmare for people to use us.
Thank you. One of the comments, I noticed Charlie's comment in the chat about learning more from the hotel sector. This is something that I had very much front of mind recently when I made an ordering mistake in a hotel and an ordering mistake on a railway website on the same day, and the hotel couldn't have been nicer, and the railway did not make me feel great, putting it mildly. And I thought, oh, one thinks of themselves a hospitality organisation and one probably at the moment doesn't. Any thoughts as to how we can maintain organically what we've started to do today? Today we've brought in 2 external perspectives, one overseas and one different sector. How can we maintain that sense of continuously learning from best practice elsewhere? Anyone got any perspectives on that question on the panel?
So one of mine, Thomas, would be make sure that we bring people in who have that experience, into the industry, influencing leadership. We've got the opportunity to do that. So let's make that change.
Fantastic. Another thing that's come out a lot in the chat is around getting senior leaders on trains, and that was something that Nick specifically said is so important. The fact that politicians in Switzerland do travel by train, and the fact that senior managers do. When I was a graduate trainee at Birmingham Central Bus Garage, the depot manager, and I was told him I needed to go to another place in Birmingham, looked horrified when I said I wasn't planning on driving and that I was planning on using the bus. This is the person who ran those very buses. This culture does exist in some places, or at least did. Back then when I started my career. Any perspectives from anyone on how we can build that culture? And I think the point Nick made is really important. We can make some commitments as the rail sector, but it's actually about people at Treasury, it's about people at DfT, it's about politicians, the people who make decisions about us also experiencing us. Vernon, have you any perspectives on that?
The only thing I'd say is so from a board perspective, and I chair boards in Manchester and in Wales, and I take the board on the road, because you can't be leading organisations like these without testing your own product. It's just a nonsense. So I think you can't put people in leadership positions unless they are actually going to do things like in Wales, which is what we do. We move the board around the country. And we often hold the board in the most inaccessible parts of the country and say, right, see you there at 9:30. And everyone trogs in at 11 to say it's impossible to get here at 9:30. And we always look at each other and say, well, exactly. How are we going to challenge that? It's that sort of leadership I think we need, in like most things in life. If you set an example and really mean it and don't do it just for effect, then it will start chipping away at the culture.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much. We are rapidly running out of time, which I'm extremely sorry about, because this has been an extremely enjoyable session. I'm very aware that there are a lot of questions that have not yet been answered. I'm afraid there were at one point 236 of you, and there are slightly fewer of us. Therefore, it is simply not practical to get to every single question that people have asked. I'd now like to invite Nigel Stevens, Chair of Transport Focus, to reflect on and close the session.
Thank you, Thomas. My camera is working. No, it's not probably. So what you can't see is the huge smile on my face, because this has been an absolutely fantastic session. And Thomas, thank you for chairing and coordinating it, and to all the speakers for some brilliant contributions. And it did exactly what I hoped it would do, which is to really lay out the challenge to all those involved in rail reform, which goes way beyond GBR, to think really hard about what we're trying to do here. And I thought it was just worth picking up a few key phrases that jumped into my brain as we went through this. The sense of purpose from Linda, I think, just absolutely says it all. What is the purpose of rail reform? What are we trying to do? Number two, customer centric, not operationally led. I love that phrase. It's so important to rail. It's such a key part of the piece. And taking risks. Why not? We need to take risks if we're going to shift the dial and do something different for the customer, not for the railway, but for the customer. And then there were some other things that came out through the rest of the session: customer plan, customer strategy, staff training and empowerment, accountability drives behaviour, end-to-end customer journey, more people to use railways. I loved politicians to boardroom to platform. And finally, I thought simplification just absolutely jumps out at me. So much to think about. We will be taking as Transport Focus, and particularly as we move into our wider role under rail reform, we will be looking to drive and to challenge and to hold the industry to account to do all these things we've talked about today. And I thought this was an absolutely cracking way of starting that debate. And thank you to all those who coordinated it, arranged it, and have spoken at it. So thank you to everybody. And that's it from me. Thank you.